Hi everybody, I'm Bette Levy, and I'm about to open my new show at the Carnegie Museum, which is entitled Tools of the Trade. It's a show that's very much a departure from the work that I usually do. I'm primarily a hand embroiderer, and I work exclusively on black silk with vividly colored silk threads. This show, however, is something that's very different in that it involves work that I've done on crochet, on rusted farm tools and other implements. Well, I think my introduction was probably prenatal. My great-great-grandmother was a very creative woman, and she started a beaded handbag company in New York City around the turn of the century. And my grandmother was the designer for the handbag company. The brothers in the family were the salesmen. My mother was very creative. She didn't do anything with the handbag company, but she was a wonderful seamstress, and she was a sculptor and a painter and an interior designer. So when I was growing up, I always had wonderful fabrics and beads and trims and handbags and all kinds of wonderful, glittery, exciting things, very visceral items around me to play with. And as a baby, I played with the beads in the workroom of the handbag company, just throwing them all over the place. And I guess the fact that I've always had this kind of inspiration around me made it pretty natural that that would be the area that I would go into. I think the fact that I lived in San Francisco during the 60s also had a lot to do with it, because everybody, myself included, was doing things like embroidering on work shirts and jeans and pillows and making patches using embroidery. So I did a lot of that work, and so this was a very logical progression on my part. And I think the fact that in my life, the women in my family, or at least my mother's family, were creative, they were productive, they used their hands, they made art, and it was just such a great role model for me. Interestingly, in my mother's side of the family, none of the men were good influences in that they had physical health problems. They were not the wage earners in the house. It was the women who went out and were productive and brought home the wages, the salaries, to keep the family alive. So that was the tradition that I experienced. You asked me if my family hadn't had that artistic predisposition, whether I would be doing something different. And when I think about it, actually only half my family had that artistic predisposition. It was only my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family was more working class, dedicated to their survival. And I think that I'm kind of a mix of both of those sides of my family. The fact that I spend so much time on my work, I don't think that necessarily came from my mother's side of the family. I think that came from my father's side of the family. Mm-hmm. They worked long and hard hours. They were living during the time of the Depression. They didn't know where their next meal would be coming from. Work was all they had. And I think in some way I kind of mirror that drivenness to produce. Mm-hmm. I like to think that I have something within me that strives, that has to create, is forced to create. I think part part of that absolutely has to be genetic. And I think part of it absolutely has to be the fact that there were people around me that had all these wonderful things for me to play with, all these little beads and threads and paints and everything else. I think that seeing people do this really inspired me to do it. It gets into the whole question of why people create, and I know that I always have to do something with my hands. My hands cannot keep still. I cannot not be doing something. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where that comes from. You know, it's I don't know. Can't answer. I think that people tend to think, and I've had people say to me, isn't it great that you can do something that's so much fun for you? And I have to respond to them, this is not fun. This is something that I have to do. It's hard. I don't do it right. I have to rip things out. I have to go over things again and again and again. I question myself as to whether what I'm doing has any value at all, any worth, any quality at all. It's being an artist is difficult not only in terms of the work that you're doing, the physical aspect of it, but also the psychological aspect of it. You're always questioning whether you're any good at all. And I think if you ask any artist, that's the number one question that they're dealing with. Mm-hmm. I know that for me, when I start a new piece of work, which is the most awesome experience, I look at the blank canvas and I think to myself, how did I ever do this before? Everything I've done before has been a fluke. I just don't know how I could have done it. And I think there are a lot of artists who feel the same way. We are all insecure about our talents and our abilities. And I think the fact that we go ahead and do those things to create our art is pretty impressive. You know, we have to fight against ourselves every step of the way.